I'm Bob Abbott with Alarca Property Management. We currently manage homes throughout the Charlotte, North Carolina and surrounding areas. Today we're going to talk about why professional property managers in Charlotte make more money than DIYers or do-it-yourself managers. For the purposes of this blog, I'm going to call property managers PMs. I'm going to call the do-it-yourself DIYers. I'll just keep it a little bit shorter. Most DIYers start by focusing on the management fee itself, and they look at that 8 or 10% or whatever that fee is and say, gosh, I can save that money. That just seems like a lot of money to spend for doing the work. They don't take into account the value of their time. They don't take into account how many things can go wrong. They don't take into account the mistakes they can make by not being a professional that cost them big money down the road. And we're going to talk about some of those. Let's start with a vacant home. Most DIYers, if they're doing it themselves, they've got other jobs. They're not at home to answer the phone. They're not at home to run over and show the tenant the home right away. And subsequently, it takes longer to rent the home. National survey shows that it takes about 60 days for a DIYer to rent that home. A professional PM can get that done in 30 days or less. Our average is 28 days currently, and has been that way since 2005. Now that you've placed the tenant, let's say the tenant stops paying rent. What are you going to do? You're going to listen to their story. Most DIYers don't run down to the courthouse as soon as they could to get them out of the house. They're going to hope that the tenant gets caught up because you don't want to deal with an eviction. A professional PM is going to be consistent and file those evictions early. One, to show the tenant you're serious, and two, if they don't pay, it gets them out of the house much more quickly. So we often save 3 or 4 months of rent versus a DIYer. Many times a year we take over accounts from people that have done it themselves, and tenants can be 10 or 12 months behind or more. But we had a case recently where it was a 20 years best friend. A woman had rented to her best friend at 20 years, had let her use her convertible and stay in the house. She was 6 months behind in the rent before she called us to help get this deadbeat tenant out of her house. What if you rent to a professional tenant? These professional tenants are folks that prey on the DIY manager. They know you don't know the rules. They know you're not there 100% of the time to take care of this, and they know the system better than you do. So they know how to game the system to get free rent and to stay in the house. We got a call several months ago from a client who was dealing with one of these professional tenants. He was an out-of-state owner. So he was driving into state from Virginia to file evictions. He'd get to court and the tenant would say, well, I don't have a smoke detector. And the owner would say, well, or the judge would ask, sir, does he have a smoke detector? And the owner couldn't answer definitively, yes, he did, because he didn't have documentation. So in our case, we would have a video of that. We would have the documentation that we replaced the batteries, and if it was missing, we would know it was the tenant's fault, and that documentation holds up in court. So that's just one example. This particular tenant told the landlord, hey, this is going to go on for months. I know the system better than you, and he ended up getting free rent for well over a year. So a professional PM is definitely going to save you money versus that case. Now let's say you've got a perfect tenant who's paying the rent on time, but you need a repair. And now you've got to run out there and make a repair. Do you do it yourself? Do you hire a professional? Do you send your friend? Often homeowners think, well, my friend does HVAC work, so I'll send him out there. Unfortunately, you're not covered from a liability standpoint. If that person you send out isn't licensed, or if you try and do it yourself and there's some problem down the road, that can be significant damages that you're going to have to pay to that tenant, particularly if someone gets hurt, which is something you never want to have happen. So protect yourself and use a properly licensed repairman. These are just several examples of where a property manager can save you money. Finally, what's your time worth? How many hours are you going to spend going out to the house, making repairs, making phone calls to the tenant, answering the phone in the middle of the night, and taking care of the things that need to be taken care of? It's much better time spent managing your own personal finances and paying a property manager to do the job properly and professionally for you. If you have questions about this, please give us a call.